there is a moment quiet, fragile, almost invisible, when a woman no longer carries her name like a wound, but like a crown she forged with her own hands. If Elara's journey has made a home in your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to From Ashes to Power, where revenge becomes rebirth, and every scar becomes the mark of a woman who dared to return. Spring did not arrive in Bremont like a celebration. It came slowly, modestly peeling back the frost with gentleness instead of thunder. Elara had always preferred it that way. Quiet changes held longer. The Ashcombe estate, once a house of mirrors and measured silence, now breathed in a new rhythm. Doors once kept locked out of fear were opened. Old staff returned with hesitant loyalty. Leora moved freely through the West Wing, laughing more often, sometimes humming, and Celeste, her mother, remained, not as a matriarch returning to her throne, but as a woman learning how to live with a daughter she had once chosen not to fight for. Their conversations were still cautious, often clipped by the shadows of memory, but they were conversations nonetheless. They shared morning tea, sometimes silence, but the silence was no longer empty. It was healing, and in the heart of it all, Elara stood not as a survivor, but as the keeper of what would come next. One morning, she walked the gallery hall alone. This was the corridor lined with generations of Ashcombe portraitsmen, with swords and ledgers, women in ivory and expectation. Her own portrait, once planned but never painted, had long been erased from the records. Until now. She had commissioned it weeks ago. The artist was discreet, young, and instructed to paint not the ghost of Lady Eleanor, but the fire that Ella had become. When the canvas arrived, it was carried by 2 footmen into the farthest alcove, the space reserved for heirs, and when they removed the covering, the room fell quiet. It was her, but not as the world remembered. No soft eyes, no demure smile. Elara stood facing forward, wrapped in emerald silk, one hand resting on the ledge of a window that opened into a storm-lit sky. Her gaze was direct, unflinching, not defiant, not bitter but sure, whole. Beneath the frame, in gilded lettering, a name had been etched, Elara Ashcombe, the reclaimed daughter. She stared at it for a long time, not with pride, not even with sorrow, but with clarity. This was the name they tried to take. Now it belonged to no one but her. That same afternoon, a letter arrived, hand-delivered, stamped with the seal of the Ashcombe Trust. Inside, a single request: Lady Ashcombe, would you attend the Global Holdings Summit in Vienna as our representative? Lady Ashcombe, the title no longer felt like a knife. Elara folded the paper and looked out the window, toward the greenhouse where her mother sat, tending to vines that had once gone wild, now trimmed with care. Leora was reading nearby, feet bare in the sunlight, her laughter drifting through the glass like a song once forgotten. She could leave, she could return to Vienna, not to hide, but to lead. She could sit among the power brokers who had once seen her as a tragedy. She could speak not from behind someone else's name, but from her own. But first there was one thing left to do. That evening, she wrote a letter to Arabella. She did not threaten, she did not beg, she did not ask for anything. She wrote only this: you may continue to believe that I returned to ruin you, but I didn't. I returned to remember myself, and in doing so, I no longer need your shadow. You can keep your mirrors. I've learned to walk in sunlight. She sealed it. No return address. Let her cousin read it and feel what she never could. Peace, not the kind that comes from winning, but the kind that comes from not needing to win anymore. As the stars rose that night, Elara stood alone at the edge of the estate gardens. No grand declarations, no final battles, only wind, and silence, and the soft echo of her own breath. And in that stillness, something inside her shifted for good. She had taken back her name. She had rebuilt her home. She had forgiven herself. What she built from here on would not be for revenge. It would be for freedom. Chapter 12. The life she chose to build. Some women are not made to return to what they were. They are meant to begin again, not with permission, but with grace. Not with fire, but with open hands. If Elara's story has stirred something in your soul, help it echo beyond these pages. Like, share, and subscribe to From Ashes to Power, where endings are just the doorways into quiet, earned peace. A year passed. Not in silence, not in sorrow, but in rhythm. It was not dramatic, the way life settled into her bones again. No thunder clapped, no curtain fell. Instead, mornings began with steam curling from cups of jasmine tea, and evenings ended with the low hum of Leora's music drifting through open hallways. Ashcombe estate had changed. not in structure, but in spirit. Gone were the rules that weighed like porcelain on the shelves. No more hushed dinners with knives placed to measure silence. No more locked doors. No more pretending. In its place bloomed a house of voice. Elara no longer walked through the estate like a stranger. Inside her father's shadow, she walked like a woman who had claimed every stone beneath her feet. She had declined the Vienna summit twice, not out of fear, but out of certainty that her worth no longer depended on standing among men who once measured her grief in shareholder meetings. She had no need to prove what was already true. Instead, she founded something new, the Foundation for Dignity and Recovery, a space for women who had been erased, cast aside, rewritten by others. It wasn't flashy, it didn't make headlines, but week by week, letters poured in, quiet women, strong voices, stories like hers, and unlike hers, and Elara read every one. She didn't want to be famous, she wanted to be useful. One afternoon, while planting rosemary along the southern wall of the greenhouse, Leora called out from the gate, "Someone's asking for you." Elara wiped the dirt from her gloves and looked up, expecting a courier, or perhaps one of the local girls asking about internships. Instead, she saw him, not Julian Nohay, was long gone, faded into some forgotten chapter. This was Gabriel Lennox. The architect from the Preservation Council, the one who had sent careful letters with structural diagrams and hand-sketched ideas for restoring the chapel's bell tower, the one who had never once asked about her past, only offered his thoughts in margins. "You have a gift for anchoring beauty to memory. This stone holds tension. It doesn't need to be hidden, just seen." He stood awkwardly now, holding a small potted camellia like it was a peace offering. "No, you said you didn't like surprises," he said gently. "But the camellias bloomed early. And I thought, well, I owed you at least one gentle interruption." Elara blinked, lips parting with a breath that was almost a laugh. "I didn't say I hated surprises," she said, brushing dust from her skirt. "I said I hated ones that arrived with expectation." He nodded, serious. "Then, I'll ask for nothing." She stepped closer, took the camellia from his hands. Its petals were pale pink, trembling slightly in the breeze. "You're not here to save me, are you?" she asked. He looked into her eyes, come steady. "No, just to see what you build next." And that, perhaps, was what undid her more than any grand confession. The quiet presence, the choice to witness, not possess. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills of Bremont, Elara sat at her writing desk and opened a blank page. She did not begin with pain. She did not begin with names. She wrote only, "I thought I came back to take revenge, but what I truly needed was to come home to myself." She paused, touched the camellia beside her, then continued, "Power is not the throne they built for you. Power is choosing whether you even want to sit on it at all. This is my beginning." Outside, wind moved through the linden trees. Inside, a woman once broken, once buried, once burned began to write the story she chose to tell. Not to survive, not to fight, but to live. And this time, no one could rewrite her. End of chapter 12. Final chapter. Elara's story ends not in fire, but in peace. She did not reclaim a crown. She reclaimed herself. Thank you for walking every step with her. If her voice still echoes in yours, like, share, and subscribe to From Ashes to Power, because somewhere, right now, another woman is about to rise, and she needs to know she's not alone. Some people inherit power, others survive hell to earn it, and when they return, they don't ask for a seat, they rebuild the throne itself. If you're walking beside Elara on every burning step, let the world hear her voice. Like, share, and subscribe to From Ashes to Power, where pain becomes wisdom, and the fallen become queens. For the first time in a decade, Ashcombe Hall opened its doors for a gathering not led by Arabella. The letters were hand-delivered, no golden crests, no velvet ribbons, just clean paper, signed, Elara Ashcombe, acting chairwoman. The rumors had already outrun her. Whispers echoed through drawing rooms and corporate offices alike, that the disinherited daughter had returned, that Arabella had been publicly exposed, that the legacy was no longer dressed in crimson lies but carried in quiet, calculated flame. But Elara wasn't interested in spectacle. She was building a future, and she would build it on truth. The hall had been quiet for years. Dust had settled into the curtains. The air still carried the scent of rosewood and old grief. Yet when Elara stepped through the grand foyer that morning, she didn't pause. She belonged here. She had always belonged. Gone was the girl in gray wool and silence. Today, she wore deep emerald green, rich, unyielding, and echoing strength without needing sparkle. Her hair pinned back, her shoulders squared. Her name no longer hidden, her voice no longer soft. In the center of the room stood the seat her father had once occupied for every family council, every trust decision, every quiet gathering of power. Elara didn't hesitate. She sat. Leora entered moments later, followed by Mr. Hale and Mrs. Voss. Behind them came 3 new board members Elara had personally selected: Tidian, sharp, and unaffiliated with the web of the past. Julian was nowhere in sight. He's gone to the coast, Leora said, sitting beside her, resigned from every Ashcombe contract, quietly, but thoroughly. Elara nodded. Let him go. She meant it. Julian no longer haunted her. He was part of the wound, but not part of the healing. Some ghosts deserved closure. Others deserved silence. Mrs. Voss opened her ledger. Arabella hasn't responded to the summons. She won't, Elara said. She'll spend years spinning a new story. Let her. I'm not here to chase her through mirrors. Mr. Hale smiled softly. Then what now? Elara leaned forward. Now, we begin. Over the next weeks, Elara moved like stormlight through the Ashcombe estate, steady, illuminating, impossible to ignore. She restructured the trust, returning half its wealth to ethical projects and reclaiming investments in education and restoration. She sold 3 properties tied to Arabella's debt-laced legacy and used the funds to rebuild Winterglass into a public library for girls from Braymont's poorest quarters. She refused interviews. She refused applause. What she built not for recognition, but for restoration. And yet, there was one place she returned to quietly, always alone. The greenhouse. It had been cleared of ivy now, glass panes replaced, benches restored. One afternoon, she sat beneath the rose arch her grandmother once planted, a journal open on her lap. Inside she wrote, "They tried to erase me with a lie, but what they didn't know was this: fire doesn't destroy truth, it reveals it. And now, I am no longer waiting to be seen. I am watching the world from my own ground, and, this time, I will never be silenced again." She closed the journal, sat in stillness, and let peace arrive, not loudly, but fully. Weeks later, during a soft spring evening, Leora brought her a small envelope, no stamp, no seal, just a name, scrawled in gold ink. Elara stared at it, her breath stilled. Inside was a photograph of her mother, standing at the old chapel, alone. And a note: "I never stopped praying for your return. I just didn't know how to unlearn my silence. If you are ready, so am I. Mother." Elara closed the envelope. She didn't cry. She simply rose, slowly, and looked toward the window where dusklight poured through like memory and promise. Chapter 10. The door she thought would never open. Some reunions don't begin with forgiveness, they begin with silence, with the trembling breath just before you knock, with the ache of knowing what was lost may never return the same. But still, you reach for it. If you've followed Elara this far, through ash, fire, and stillness, don't stop now. Like, share, and subscribe to From Ashes to Power, where stories are not rewritten, they are reclaimed, one truth at a time. The road to the Ashcombe Chapel had always been lined with linden trees. In spring, they bloomed with pale green leaves and soft white flowers, releasing a scent so delicate it could make even the bitterest memory taste sweeter for a moment. Elara remembered walking that path barefoot once, years ago, with Leora giggling beside her, and wildflowers tucked behind her ears. Her mother had waited at the chapel steps, then, young and poised, her arms open, her smile like safety. That was another lifetime. That was before the silence, before the eyes that stopped meeting hers, before the name Eleanor was swallowed whole by shame and replaced with absence. Now, Elara walked that same path again, but each step felt like pressing into snow that had yet to melt, into the chill of something fragile. Not fear, not quite pain, but the hollow space left behind when love has been wrapped in silence too long to feel familiar. She had thought of this moment more times than she cared to admit. Sometimes, in her loneliest nights in Vienna, she would imagine it her mother rushing to embrace her, or falling to her knees in regret, or even turning away in cold denial. But never once had she imagined what it might feel like simply to stand before her again. Both of them older now, their edges reshaped by years, they could never explain. The chapel came into view just as the wind stilled. It sat nestled beneath climbing vines and time-worn stone, its wooden doors half open like a question only Elara could answer, and there standing not inside, but just beyond the threshold was her mother, Lady Celeste Ashcombe, the same ivory skin, the same posture elegant even in stillness, but there were silver strands in her once ebony hair now, and fine lines, carved delicately into the corners of her mouth, as if time had sketched grief into her face while no one was watching. She did not speak, she only looked at Elara, and that look was not cold, it was not warm, it was something far more devastating. It was full of years unsaid, of questions never asked, of a daughter she had failed, not out of malice, but out of fear that had calcified into inaction, until it became too large to shatter. Elara didn't move, neither did she, not for what felt like a full breath of eternity, and then very slowly, Celeste stepped forward, not with arms reaching, not with tears, but with a single word, Eleanor. It wasn't a name, it was a wound, and Elara swallowed hard. That name, she said, her voice breaking into quiet, died a long time ago. Celeste's eyes shimmered. I know, she whispered, then she added, as if every syllable tasted like confession, but I didn't know how to grieve her without grieving myself. The words cracked something open, not rage, not absolution, but recognition. This was not a villain before her, not the orchestrator of exile. This was a woman who had lived with her own silence like chains around her ribcage, a woman who had chosen appearances over instinct, who had buried her daughter to protect a name that now belonged to no one. Elara stepped closer, not fully into embrace, but into proximity. I needed you, she said softly, and you chose not to see me. Celeste closed her eyes, as if the admission pierced her more deeply than any accusation. I did, she breathed. I told myself it was mercy. That if I cut you off, it would all pass faster, that the scandal would fade and you could disappear gently. I thought I was sparing you. You weren't, Elara said, voice low. You were sparing yourself. Silence. Heavy. But then Celeste did something unexpected. She sank to the chapel step, knees trembling beneath her gown, hands clasped, not in dignity, but in something close to surrender. I don't know if I can fix what I broke, she said, but if you'll let me, I'll start with today. Elara stared at her mother, this woman who had once stood behind gold gates and cold smiles, now kneeling not for forgiveness, but for the chance to be forgiven. And after everything, after Julian, after Arabella, after exile and resurrection, this was the moment that cracked her most. Not vengeance, not triumph, but the ache of love that never got to finish becoming. She knelt to not beside Celeste but facing her. I don't need apologies, Elara said. I need presence. Celeste nodded, and then after years of distance, walls, unsaid things, she reached out, not fast, but certain, and Elara let her. They sat like that for what felt like hours to women, to generations of silence, breathing the same spring air, hearing the same wind, not healed, not undone, but beginning. Closure isn't a gift they give you, it's the fire you light yourself, even if it means burning the bridge you once begged to walk across. If Elara's journey is echoing in your bones, help her fire spread like share, and subscribe to From Ashes to Power, where scars become strength, and the forgotten rewrite their fate. The pier looked exactly the same, worn wood planks, half-rotted railings, and the restless whisper of the lake beneath, dark, deep, and cold as memory. The moon had begun to rise, casting thin silver across the water's surface, but the air was thick with fog and ghosts. Elara walked slowly, every step calling back the echoes of girlhood, barefoot races with Leora, stolen glances with Julian, and the last night she stood here before everything fell apart, the night he said he loved her, the night after which he never came back, and now, after 7 years of silence, he'd summoned her here. She wore no mask this time, no armor but her spine. Her coat whipped lightly in the wind as she approached the end of the pier where he stood, back turned, hands tucked into his coat pockets like he was still the charming heir with too many secrets and not enough courage. Julian, she said. He turned, older, a little thinner, but still devastating in that way. Some men are born with a kind of practiced vulnerability that once made girls fall too fast. It no longer worked on her. Elara, he said, softly. She said nothing. Let the silence do what her voice no longer needed to. He stepped closer. I didn't know how to face you. She tilted her head. But you knew how to face Arabella. That part was easy. wasn't it? He flinched. Just barely. It wasn't like that then. What was it? Her voice didn't rise. You let them cast me out. You let them destroy me. And you married the lie they used to do it. Julian ran a hand through his hair, the polished mask cracking. I tried to fight them. Your father, he stopped speaking to me. Arabella made sure everyone thought I'd been part of it. You were, Elara said, voice low, because when they came for me, you didn't speak. You watched, his eyes filled with something like regret, or perhaps just guilt masquerading as sentiment. She told me you left, that you wrote a confession, that you'd chosen to disappear. He looked at her, face strained. I didn't believe it, not at first, but when no letters came, when no one would talk about you, Elara crossed her arms, holding herself still. So instead of searching for me, you let her climb into my place, into my name, into your bed. He looked down. There it was. The truth. And it wasn't a knife, it was dust. It didn't hurt because it was sharp. It hurt because it had once mattered. And now it didn't. I asked you here, Julian said after a long pause, because she's planning something. Elara blinked. Arabella. He nodded. She's been speaking with a man from Ventera Holdings. She's trying to split the Ashcombe Trust sell off the international assets. Under the table, Elara stiffened. She doesn't have that authority anymore. She thinks she does, Julian said. And she's desperate now. You've publicly humiliated her. She's not going to let that be the end. Alara's gaze sharpened. Why are you telling me this? He hesitated. Because I owe you the truth. Because I'm tired of being complicit. Or, she said, because you're realizing she won't protect you when it all collapses. His silence was answer enough. You once said you loved me, Elara whispered. But you only loved me when I was soft, didn't you? When I hadn't learned to fight. Julian's face twisted, his voice a breath. I still love you. She took a step back. No, you love the version of me you destroyed. And I won't carry that for you anymore. She turned, then coat flaring in the wind. Heart steady, spine straight. She didn't look back as she walked down the pier. Not even when he called her name. Because she was no longer the girl who needed his love. She was the woman who had rebuilt her soul from ash. That night, back at her room, she stood by the window and stared into the dark, thinking not of Julian, but of Arabella, of Ventera Holdings, of legacy and theft. And then Leora entered his wide, breath-caught Elara, she said, holding up an envelope just delivered. She knows, inside was a single card, black and gold. You want war, cousin? Then come to the fire. Underneath, a date, a time, a location. Arabella wasn't retreating. She was calling her out. And Elara smiled. Chapter 8. The House of Mirrors' revenge doesn't come with thunder, it comes with reflection. When you look into their eyes and let them see what they did, in the face of the girl they buried. If your heart is beating with Elara's every step, help this voice carry further. Like, share, and subscribe to From Ashes to Power, where survival turns into strategy, and silence becomes strength. The invitation led her to the Winterglass estate, an abandoned Ashcombe property once used for seasonal gatherings, left to decay after her exile. It stood on the northern edge of Bremont, hidden behind a forest of blackened firs and quiet snow, rumored to be haunted by the echoes of wealth gone wrong. Elara arrived alone, no driver, no entourage, only the soft crush of boots in frost and the whisper of fabric in the wind. The estate loomed ahead, lit from within like a stage waiting for its players. It was too quiet, too polished. This wasn't a meeting, it was a performance. She stepped through the grand archway, past gilded doors that creaked with memories. Inside, the air smelled of old perfume and polished lies. Candles flickered from every corner, and lining the vast corridor were mirrors, dozens of them. Old, warped, beveled at the edges, some cracked, others untouched, all reflecting the same solitary figure moving steadily through them. Her, Arabella, had set the stage perfectly, at the heart of the estate. In the ballroom where winter galas once spilled champagne across marble floors, Arabella stood beneath a chandelier of glass thorns, alone, or so it seemed. She wore silver tonight, glistening like ice, about to break. Elara, she said, her voice carrying without needing volume. You came. I always finish what others start, Elara replied, stepping closer. Arabella didn't flinch. I knew you'd turn this into a war. You always had a flair for melodrama. And you always had a talent for knives hidden in smiles. Arabella's lips curved. It's not about you anymore. It hasn't been, not for years. Oh, but it is, Elara said softly. Everything you built, every mask you wear was stitched from the silence you forced on me. She let the words hang. Arabella moved slowly to the side table and poured 2 glasses of wine. She offered one. Elara didn't take it. Arabella smiled, still so cautious. No, Elara replied. Just no longer naive. Arabella circled slowly. You've caused quite the stir, she said. You embarrassed me. Took back your place. You even tried to make Julian feel guilty. And now you want what? My confession. My crown. I want truth, Elara said. And for the world to know it. Publicly. Arabella's smile cracked. You think this is a courtroom. You think people care. They don't. They only remember who wins. They'll remember what I make them remember, Elara said. Arabella stepped closer. You always were the clever one. But that's the thing about clever girls, Elara. They make enemies faster than they make friends. And enemies wait. Something in her tone shifted. And Elara suddenly understood. She wasn't alone in this room. A rustle behind the mirror to her left. Footsteps in the hall beyond the ballroom. Arabella hadn't invited her to negotiate. She had lured her to silence. Her again. But Elara didn't panic. Instead, she smiled. Because she wasn't here to beg. She was here to end it. You brought them, didn't you? Elara said quietly. To trap me. To finish the job you started. Arabella tilted her head. You always did see too much. I saw everything, Elara whispered. Even the parts I pretended not to. From her coat, she pulled a small device and clicked it. Arabella's eyes narrowed. What is that? A recording, Elara said. Streaming live. To every board member. Every journalist. Every lawyer who turned their face away from me 7 years ago. Arabella paled. And now, Elara said, stepping forward, they'll see exactly who you are. Arabella laughed a harsh, broken sound. You won't make it out of here, she hissed. Then let them find your lies wrapped around my name, Elara whispered back. Let them see how far you're willing to go to keep what was never yours. Suddenly, the ballroom doors burst open. But it wasn't armed guards or goons. It was Liora. Behind her. Mr. Hale, Mrs. Voss, and 2 reporters from the Braemont Ledger. Arabella spun in fury. You, Elara, planned for your trap, Leora said, stepping forward. We all did. Arabella stepped back, surrounded, unraveling. This is betrayal. No, Elara said gently. This is truth. The thing you always feared more than losing. Arabella didn't scream. She didn't cry. She stood still, like a statue cracking from the inside. And Elara walked past her, not with triumph, but with closure. Outside, the snow had begun to fall again. Not violently, not with vengeance, just soft. Cleansing. Elara looked up and let the flakes settle into her hair. And for the first time in 7 years, she felt light. Not because she had won, but because she had ended it. A bell rang in the ballroom. Midnight. Time for the announcement. Elara closed the folio, straightened her spine. Get this, somewhere safe, she said. Tonight, we let them see the shadow before the lightning. She returned to the ballroom. Just as the conductor lifted his baton and the violins held their breath, Arabella and Julian stepped forward, faces lit by chandeliers and applause. Arabella raised her glass, but before she could speak, a voice rang out across the room. Quite a performance, cousin. The music died. Gasps spread like wildfire. Elara stepped into the center of the ballroom, unmasking with slow grace. Arabella's face paled. Julian turned, his jaw slackened, and the crowd stared at the girl they once forgot, the girl who had returned. Some truths arrive not with thunder, but with silence so deep it cuts through silk and bone alike. If your heart is echoing with Elara's rise, let her voice reach others, to leave a like and subscribe to From Ashes to Power, where every quiet soul finds the fire they thought they lost. The ballroom stood frozen. No clink of glass, no cough behind a gloved hand. Not even the rustle of silk dared break the silence. Just her. Elara. Not Eleanor, the obedient daughter, not the scandal, not the exile, but Eleanor, masked, unyielding, and utterly unafraid. Arabella lowered her glass, her knuckles whitened around the stem, lips poised in a smile too sharp, too slow. Elara, she said, her voice syrupy smooth, crafted for an audience. What an unexpected return. Elara tilted her head, her voice soft but laced with steel. Unexpected for you, perhaps. I've been expected for quite some time. The guests, once murmuring in disbelief, now shifted uncomfortably, torn between curiosity and fear. They didn't know what would happen, but they knew they would remember it. Julian stepped forward. Eleanor, don't call me that. Elara cut in. That name belonged to a girl you left bleeding in the dark. I buried her myself. The words cracked through the air like a whip. Arabella's composure wavered for half a second, but it was enough. Elara dear, this is neither the time nor place, Arabella said quickly, eyes scanning the crowd, already strategizing whatever misunderstanding you've clung to all these years. There was no misunderstanding. Elara interrupted, lifting the folio in her hand. Only forgery, betrayal, and theft. And I have proof. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She opened the folder, letting its contents spill onto the nearest table. Financial documents, handwritten correspondences, copies of the altered letter, and the original. Each page falling like snow, quiet and devastating. Gasps erupted. Arabella moved to stop her, but Julian caught her wrist, hesitating, reading a line scrawled in their father's own handwriting. Arabella, what is this? Arabella's face drained of color. I asked you a question, Julian said, louder now, but Elara didn't wait for the unraveling to begin. She turned to the crowd, to the board members, the family friends, the socialites with selective memories. 7 years ago, I was accused of a scandal fabricated to remove me from my inheritance, from my family, from my future. Tonight, in the very halls where that lie was born, I stand with truth. And it is not forgiveness I've come to seek, it is restoration. She paused. Let the weight of it sink in. Let them remember what it meant for a girl they discarded to speak with fire in her voice and stillness in her spine. I am not here to beg for my name, she said, voice low and precise. I've already taken it back. After the announcement broke, the room began to split like ice cracking over a deep lake. Some guests approached with wide eyes and murmured apologies. Others drifted toward Arabella, confused, hesitant, afraid of choosing the wrong side. But the shift was undeniable. The Ashcombe name would never again be spoken without hers attached. Julian, now visibly shaken, tried to call after her, but she had already turned away. She walked through the double doors and into the night air, falling quietly, the air cold and cleansing. Leora waited near the gates, a gloved hand clutching a scarf to her throat. It's done, Elara said softly. No, Leora whispered. It's only begun. Back at the Crow's Hollow, Elara sat before the fireplace, her dress loosened, hair unpinned, but her eyes burned brighter than ever. They'll fight back, Leora warned. Arabella will never give up power that is. Elara nodded. I know. She doesn't need to fall tonight, but she needed to hear the sound of her crown cracking. Leora hesitated. What will you do now? Elara looked into the fire, her voice almost tender. I'll take back the company next, she said, the Ashcombe Trust. She's been running it into vanity projects and whispered deals with Julian's network. Father's legacy deserves better. And after that? Leora asked. Elara met her gaze, soft but sure. After that, I rebuild everything they tried to destroy. And then, I rest. Chapter 6. Bloodlines and Balance Sheets. Power doesn't live in whispers of legacy or chandeliers of old wealth. It lives in choices made when no one is watching, and in names they tried to erase. If Elara's fight is burning brighter in your chest, help her light reach further. Leave a like, and subscribe to From Ashes to Power, where forgotten daughters rise to claim thrones built to exclude them. 3 days after the masquerade, Ashcombe Trust Board convened in its marble tower, overlooking the heart of Brema. Rain tapped against the windows like a second hand ticking down the end of a dynasty or the beginning of its true heir. Elara stood before the entrance, cloaked in charcoal gray, hair tied back, documents tucked beneath one arm like a sword, drawn for war. The name Ashcombe gleamed in brushed gold above the double doors, sterile and silent. This was where her father had built his empire, part estate management, part investment, part legacy machine. What had once been his life's pride had now become Arabella's private playground, but not for long. Inside the boardroom was exactly as Elara remembered it, cold, masculine, designed for decisions rather than dreams. 12 chairs formed a long oval around a blackened oak table. At the head sat Mr. Trenton, the firm's legal advisor and a man who had known both Eleanor and Arabella since they were children. He raised a brow when Elara entered, but said nothing. The others followed suit, shuffling papers, clearing throats, avoiding eye contact. Only one man, Mr. Hale, The last old friend of her father stood slowly and offered a nod. Miss Elara, he said, using her name without pause. It's been a long time. She met his eyes. Too long. Arabella arrived 10 minutes late, by accident. She swept into the room wearing navy silk, her engagement ring catching the overhead light like a polished blade. She smiled with exquisite precision, as if nothing at all had changed. I hope this isn't going to take long, she said. Julian and I are expected at the Montclair estate this afternoon. Elara laid a folder on the table. Then let's not waste time. She opened it and began. The presentation was surgical. Elara began with misappropriated funds donations, promised to charities that never received a cent. Then came the ghost investors, shell accounts used to inflate trusts' quarterly reports. Finally, she slid across the board's original bylaws, written by their father, which clearly stated, only a direct bloodline heir may assume majority control after his passing unless declared legally unfit, and unless anyone at this table is prepared to bring forward that declaration, Elara said, voice calm and cutting. My name stands. Arabella laughed, but it was brittle. Do you think waving around old documents and ancient pride makes you worthy to lead? You haven't been here in years. You've done nothing. I survived, Elara interrupted. I survived what you orchestrated, what you buried me under, and while you were hosting luncheons, I was studying finance under an assumed name in Vienna. While you bought new gowns, I learned to rebuild portfolios. While you lied, I learned the truth. She turned to Mr. Trenton. The board is entitled to an emergency vote when an heir presents evidence of fraud. I'm invoking that clause now. Silence. Then, slowly, Trenton cleared his throat. She has the right, he said begrudgingly. We vote. Now. Arabella stood, livid. You can't seriously believe but it was too late. One by one, hands were raised. Mr. Hale, Mrs. Voss, the accountant from the North Division, even Trenton, after a long pause, lifted his fingers. 7 votes in her favor. Arabella stood frozen, her mouth opened but no sound came out, and Elara simply sat, not triumphant, not cruel, steady. After the meeting, Mr. Hale walked her to the elevator. Your father would be proud, he said. She nodded slowly. He taught me to play chess. Arabella thought it was about the Queen's crown. He taught me, it's about knowing when to let go of the pawn, and when to reclaim the board. As the elevator doors closed, Elara saw her reflection in the metal, not just the woman they tried to erase, but the leader they never saw coming. Back at the Crow's Hollow, Leora was waiting with tea and a stack of mail. You did it, she whispered. No, Elara said, removing her coat. I started it. She sifted through the envelopes until she paused on one old return address, only a seal marked with the Westmere crest. She opened it slowly. Inside, a note in Julian's hand. Meet me at the old pier. There are things you need to know. Things I never said. Leora's eyes widened. You don't trust him? No, Elara replied, slipping the letter into her coat. But sometimes, to burn down the last of what chained you, you have to look it in the eye one last time. Some truths do not shout, they wait, coiled like vines in an abandoned place, blooming only for those brave enough to return. If your heart is drawn deeper into Elara's world, please like this chapter, and subscribe to From Ashes to Power, where the quiet find their voice, and vengeance begins with a whisper. The greenhouse had once been her sanctuary. Built at the edge of the Ashcombe estate gardens, it stood half hidden beneath a veil of ivy and neglect, its glass panels streaked with time and rain. As a girl, Elara had spent countless afternoons within its walls, pruning roses, sketching leaves, hiding from tutors, and the suffocating formality of tea rooms. It was the only place she felt she could breathe, the only place where no one told her how to sit, how to smile, how to disappear. And now, after all these years, someone had chosen it for their secret meeting. Midnight arrived with the silence of falling snow. Elara walked beneath the pale moonlight, cloaked in wool, her breath soft against the cold. Each step crunched lightly over frozen leaves, and the world around her, Braemont, her past, her name seemed to hold its breath. She reached the greenhouse, gate still unlocked, still rusted, still exactly how she remembered it. She pushed the door open with a careful hand. The hinges groaned, and the scent of damp earth and faded blossoms rose to meet her. Moonlight filtered in through cracked glass, painting the room in silver and shadow. Ferns curled against the stone floor, and ivy clung to the rafters like old secrets refusing to let go. But the room was not empty. A figure stood at the far end, still, hooded, waiting. Elara closed the door behind her, locking it out of instinct. You wrote the note, she said softly, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. The figure didn't move for a moment. Then, slowly, they lowered the hood. It was Liora. Time had sculpted her face into something sharper, more guarded. The once bubbly child was now a woman, beautiful, but brittle, like glass held together by silence. Elara, she whispered, no longer Eleanor, not Lady Ash, just Elara. Leora stepped forward, and in a single breath, years collapsed between them. I wasn't sure you'd come, Leora said, eyes shimmering. I didn't know if you were still. I shouldn't be, Elora replied. But here, I am. They stood in silence, and then, Leora reached out barely, touching her sister's arm, like she didn't believe she was real. I found it, she whispered. I found the original letter. Elara blinked. What do you mean? The one Arabella forged. She wasn't careful. She copied a letter father wrote to his solicitor. But I found the real one hidden in his old desk drawer, buried beneath land deeds and estate bills. Leora pulled a folded page from her coat. It proves you were never involved with that man. That it was all a setup. So she could secure her inheritance. Elara took the page with trembling fingers. The seal was intact. The handwriting was their father's, familiar, meticulous. The contents were clear. Business transactions, nothing more. No scandal, no shame, no justification for the storm that followed. Arabella had twisted it into something poisonous. She remembered the aftermath, the gasps at the breakfast table, her mother's shattered teacup, her father's silence, the family lawyer arriving, without warning. Elara was questioned, disgraced, sent away under the pretense of rest, and never called home again, because of a lie, because of greed, because Arabella had always wanted what wasn't hers. And now there was proof. Leo's voice trembled. I tried to show Mother. She said it didn't matter anymore. That piece was more important than truth. But it does matter, Elara. You matter. Elara looked at her sister, older now, wounded in ways that couldn't be seen. I need more than this letter, Elara murmured. I need to know what Arabella's hiding now. I need to understand why she still acts like nothing happened. She didn't just erase me, Leora. She replaced me. Leora hesitated. There's more, she said, then reached into her bag. This came 3 days ago, from someone who works at the estate. She handed Elara a photograph. It showed Arabella standing beside a man Elara recognized too well, the Earl of Westmere, once Eleanor's suitor, now Arabella's fiancé. The final blade. Elara's hand curled into a fist, the letter crumpling slightly in her grip. She took a breath, not of sorrow, but of clarity. So that was the end game. Arabella had taken her name, her place, her future, and Elara would take back every piece. Will you help me? She asked. Leora didn't hesitate. I never stopped. The sisters stood beneath the broken glass roof, moonlight bathing them in pale fire. Around them, the plants rustled faintly in the cold. Somewhere beyond the garden, a fox howled. And in the shadow of the greenhouse, something ancient awakened inside Elara. Not hatred, not even vengeance, but purpose. Chapter 4. The Masquerade. Of lies, the most dangerous lies are the ones draped in silk and perfume, because they smile while they cut. If Elara's return is tightening the strings of your heart, don't forget to like and subscribe to From Ashes to Power, where every whisper becomes thunder, and the quiet girl learns to dance with fire. 3 nights later, the invitations arrived, like poisoned roses. Gold embossed envelopes, sealed with crimson wax. The annual Ashcombe Winter Masquerade Ball, a tradition that had once been Eleanor's favorite. A dazzling swirl of violins, velvet, and whispered promises beneath chandeliers. A stage where reputations bloomed or withered in a single night. And now, it would be the battlefield. Arabella had orchestrated it flawlessly. The engagement announcement with the Earl of Westmere was scheduled to be unveiled that evening. An elegant press release, a string quartet, champagne poured into crystal flutes bearing the Ashcombe crest. It would be a coronation, not just of love, but of victory. She had taken Elara's place in every way that mattered. But what she hadn't expected was that the ghost she had buried would rise and walk back into that ballroom, not as the girl she betrayed, but as the woman she never saw coming. Elara stood before the mirror in the rented room at the Crow's Hollow, the fire crackling low behind her. Leora sat nearby, lacing up a pair of jet black gloves. I still have the dress, Leora said softly, the one they locked away after that night. I kept it. I don't know why. Elara turned, heart tight. Show me. Leora opened the trunk she had brought with her, revealing a gown wrapped in time, midnight blue silk, long-sleeved with a plunging back, stitched with black beading like a constellation trapped in shadow. It had once belonged to their grandmother, passed down for the debutantes of the Ashcombe Linentil. Eleanor was erased from that legacy. Now it would return. Elara reached out, running her fingers along the fabric. This time, I don't wear it for their approval, she whispered. I wear it for the reckoning. The night of the masquerade arrived, wrapped in frost and fog. Ashcombe manor blazed with light, windows aglow like the eyes of a sleeping beast now roused. Carriages lined the long driveway, gentlemen in tailored suits, women in gowns that sparkled like frozen rivers. Masks of gold, porcelain, and velvet concealed faces, but not intentions. Elara stepped out of her carriage alone. A mask of matte black covered half her face. Simple, elegant, sharp, she moved through the gates like a memory returned, like a shadow slipping through the seams of silk and glass. No one recognized her at first, and yet many turned to look, drawn to something in the way she held herself, like a question they couldn't quite name. Inside, the ballroom pulsed with music and murmurs. Elara's heels struck marble, each step measured like a verse in an unfinished poem. She moved through the crowd, catching fragments of conversation, veiled laughter, whispers of an engagement, of Arabella, of the Ashcombe name being redeemed, rethreaded, reborn. She found her near the center of the ballroom. Arabella, radiant, regal, draped in red like a queen of blood and fire, and beside her, the Earl of Westmere Julian. He hadn't changed, still impeccably dressed, still smiling like he had never tasted betrayal, still gazing at Arabella with the kind of affection that once belonged to someone else. Elara did not flinch, she simply watched. And then Arabella's eyes locked with hers. Even behind the mask, the shock was visible, her lips parted, her posture stiffened. She leaned into Julian, whispering something, but her gaze never left. Elara froze and haunted. Calculating, Elara gave her a slow, deliberate smile, and walked away. She made her way to the east wing of the manor, where a long corridor led to the family library. Few guests ventured there during balls, too quiet, too old, but Elara remembered. She remembered every panel of oak, every secret passage, every drawer where documents had once been hidden. Leora was already waiting. She wore a maid's dress, borrowed from one of the house staff who owed her a favor. I found it, she whispered, holding up a thin leather folio. Estate records, financial transfers, and something else. Elara opened the file, scanning quickly until her fingers stopped. A line of inheritance signatures, including one name that should never have been there. Julian Westmere, Leora said, her voice trembling. They're not just engaged. He's investing in Ashcombe. He stands to inherit part of the estate once they're married. Arabella promised him. Shares your name was supposed to hold. Elara exhaled slowly. So, it was never about love. No, Leora whispered. It was always about control. Some souls enter the world like a thin veil of mist, silent and unnoticed, only to one day become the wind that turns the tides of fate. If you're listening to this story, let it live on by leaving a like, and gently subscribe to From Ashes to Power, where forgotten hearts rise, and silence becomes strength. When autumn began to dry the last leaves in the garden behind the old Windmere Hill Museum, people once again noticed the girl who arrived every Monday morning punctual as the ticking of the antique clock in the entrance hall. She came earlier than the janitor, always sitting quietly in front of a single oil painting hung in the northern gallery, a portrait of a young woman in a sea-green dress by an open window, the wind lifting her hair in a soft, endless dance. No one quite remembered when the girl first began her visits, only that her presence eventually felt as natural as the dust floating through the sunlit air. The girl in the gray coat, hair tied loosely, fingers resting gently on her knees, eyes distant, carrying with them the weight of something lost. Her name was Elara. The museum staff didn't know much about her, only that she once worked at the town's small library and left one day without explanation. She lived above a forgotten bakery between two narrow streets, with no friends, no family, and no sound but the gentle click of her old tea kettle each night. But every Monday, rain or shine, she would return to that painting, listening, perhaps, to a song only she could hear, or waiting for a message whispered only to the version of herself she had long buried. And no one knew that Elara once had another name, a name that, when spoken in the grand estates on the eastern side of the city, would draw whispers, side glances, and hushed tones, a name that belonged to one of the region's most esteemed bloodlines where status was carved in glass, etiquette etched in ice, and ambition fed on silence. But that name, along with her childhood, her honor, and perhaps even her soul, swallowed whole on a winter night years ago, when a single lie ruined a white dress, and laughter echoed through halls while innocence died in the shadows. No one called her Lady Eleanor anymore. To the world, she was only Elara, quiet girl with the cracked porcelain teacup and a love for forgotten art. But silence, too, can hold the fiercest storms. One early December morning, when fog pressed thick against the windows and the wind tapped at the museum panes as if seeking entry, Elara sat in her usual place. But today, her fingers didn't rest quietly. They unfolded a letter, yellowed with age, but folded with precision. Inside was a single line, written in a hand so familiar it made her breath catch. If you're alive, come home. They never believed you would. The wind howled like a voice from the crack between worlds. Elara stood for the first time in many months, leaving the portrait behind without looking back. She stepped into the street. Reflected in the mirror of a glass shop, she saw not the faded figure she had once been. Instead, there was something new in her eyes, something sharp, awake, and quietly blazing. Like a spark long buried under ash, finally meeting air. At her small rented room, she knelt and pulled out a box hidden beneath the floorboards. Inside was a tarnished gold ring, an old university card, a diary missing its middle pages, and one photograph. In it, a radiant girl smiled beside her parents and younger sister, her face full of light, of promise, of dreams the present Elara could no longer recognize. But she didn't cry. She simply closed the box, took the ring, and slid it onto her smallest finger. Each movement carried the stillness of ritual, not of mourning, but of reckoning. No one knew what had truly happened to Elara, but she remembered, and those who erased her, those who whispered and signed and condemned, would remember too. That night, snow came early. On the rooftop of her creaking building, Elara stood beneath a pale moon, eyes closed, lips murmuring a name, a single name, sharp as broken glass, and heavy as truth, the name of the one who betrayed her, the one who turned the tide, the one she would face again. She didn't flinch, she didn't weep, she breathed in, because this was not the end. It was only the first chapter. And this time, she would write it herself. Chapter 2. The letter that never should have been found. Every storm begins as a whisper, sometimes in the shape of a letter, sometimes in the shape of a girl no one thought would ever return. If this story stirs something within you, don't forget to like and subscribe to From Ashes to Power, where silence is broken, and The Fallen Rise with Grace. The train to Bremont arrived late that evening, sliding through the snow hills like a ghost returning to the scene of its death. Inside, Elara sat alone in the corner carriage, gloved hands resting on her lap, eyes staring past the frost-laced window into a darkness she remembered too well. The rhythmic clatter of steel on rail was the only sound, steady, like a heartbeat refusing to forget. Bremont. Once her world, once her prison. It had been 7 years, 7 winters, since that night, since the scandal, the exile, the silence. 7 years since her name had been torn from the ledgers of the noble Ashcombe family, erased as if she had never been born. She was 19 then, just shy of her debut into society. Known for her grace and wit and those haunting violet eyes that her mother used to say came from some long-forgotten ancestor of Irish blood. And now she was returning, not as Lady Elara Ashcombe, but as Elara, and she carried with her the one thing they hadn't anticipated: memory. The letter had not come by chance. She'd found it inside a second-hand book she purchased at the flea market 2 weeks ago. Old volume of poetry by Christina Rossetti, bound in velvet blue, pages lined with pressed flowers. She hadn't noticed the folded paper until she got home. Tucked between 2 verses about betrayal and buried love, the handwriting was familiar, too familiar. It belonged to Leora, her younger sister. If you're alive, come home. They never believed you would. The ink was smudged, but the pain behind those words was fresh. Elara remembered Leora as a child, bright, precocious, always clinging to her arm. In the chaos that followed Eleanor's fall, Leora had been locked away too, in a different kind of prison, forced to wear smiles at luncheons, to nod politely when people whispered about her disgraced sister, to pretend nothing had happened. But she remembered, and perhaps now, She was ready to speak. The train hissed as it pulled into Braemont Station. Elara stepped off slowly, her boots crunching in the snow. The platform hadn't changed. Same cast-iron benches, same ivy curling along the columns, same icy breath that wrapped around her neck like the fingers of the past. She walked alone through the narrow streets, passing bakeries with shuttered windows, lamps flickering like nervous glances. No one recognized her, and even if they had, would they believe their eyes? She found shelter at an inn on the edge of town. The Crow's Hollow. The sign creaked in the wind, and the woman at the counter barely looked up when Elara paid in cash, giving only a first name. That night, she lay awake in a narrow bed, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall, counting back every hour since the lie. And the lie had been elegant, cruel, designed with precision. A forged letter, a scandalous affair never committed, a hidden envelope discovered by a maid whose silence was bought with gold, and Elara trusting, caught in a web spun by someone who had always smiled too perfectly. Her cousin, Arabella. The only other woman in the family with a claim to the inheritance. It had been Arabella's voice that cried shame, Arabella's hand that placed the fake letters under Father's pillow. It was Arabella who had whispered to Mother behind closed doors until even she stopped looking Elara in the eyes. But what they didn't know was that Elara had survived, and she had learned. At dawn, she returned to the streets, this time with purpose. Cloaked in gray, she moved like a shadow toward the house she once called home, Ashcombe Manor. It rose at the end of the avenue, like a wounded beast, beautiful, distant, cold. Ivy still crawled up its stone walls, and the wrought iron gate bore the family crest, a black stag beneath a crown. She stood in silence, letting the wind kiss her cheeks, remembering the feel of its steps beneath her bare feet as a child, remembering the scent of roses in June, the sound of her mother's heels echoing through the marble corridors, her father's cane tapping as he read aloud from the paper, Leora's laugh as they chased each other through the garden maze. Then, it was all gone. Elara turned away, not yet ready to confront the ghosts inside those walls. Not yet. She had one stop first, the chapel that stood on the northern hill, forgotten by most, but Elara remembered the creak of its door, the uneven pews, the old priest who once told her that some truths were like seeds, buried long enough, they bloom into wrath or redemption. And there, in the chapel's quiet, she found it, an envelope, fresh, unsealed, placed on the altar, as if meant to be discovered. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside, a new note: I know who framed you. Meet me at the greenhouse, midnight. Come alone. There was no signature, no mark, only the undeniable fact: someone else remembered, and someone else wanted her back.